I am going to mix up a few words, pronunciations, and I hope that that's okay with you because I'm going for it anyway. And this feels really important to share, and I want to talk after I'm finished reading this excerpt from a Ken Wilber book, and I so appreciate his work. I want to share about self-care and the place in which we can actually self-care from, because it is not your traditional pedicure, okay? That's not what real self-care is. So let's just dig into this for a second and talk about egolessness and self-care. First I'm going to read, then I'm going to get to my point. And this is like a million points all together, so get excited. And please forgive me, I'm going to butcher words, and some I'm just not even going to try to attempt. Egolessness, Ken Wilber. Precisely because the ego, the soul, and the self can all be present simultaneously, we can better understand the real meaning of egolessness, a notion that has caused an inordinate amount of confusion. But egolessness does not mean the absence of a functional self. That's psychotic, not a sage. It means that one is no longer exclusively identified with that self. One of the many reasons we have trouble with the notion of egoless is that people want their egoless sages to fulfill all of their fantasies of saintly or spiritual, which usually means dead from the neck down, without fleshy wants or desires, gently smiling all the time. All of the things that people typically have trouble with, money, food, sex, relationships, desire, they want their saints to be without. Egoless sages are above all that, is what people want. Talking heads is what they want. Religion, they believe, will simply get rid of the baser instincts, drives, and relationships, and hence they look to religion not for advice on how to live with enthusiasm, but on how to avoid it, repress it, deny it, and escape it. In other words, the typical person wants the spiritual sage to be less than a person, somehow devoid of all of the messy, juicy, complex, pulsating, desiring, urging forces that drive most human beings. We expect our sages to be an absence of all that drives us. All the things that frighten us, confuse us, torment us, confound us, we want our sages to be untouched by them altogether. And that absence, that vacancy, that less than personal, is what we often mean by egoless. But egoless does not mean less than personal. It means more than personal. Not personal minus, but personal plus all the normal personality qualities, plus some transpersonal ones. Think of the great yogis, saints, and sages from Moses to Christ. They were not feeble-mannered toast. There, I did it. That's what I'm going with. But fierce movers and shakers, from bullwhips in the temple to subduing entire countries. They rattled the world on its own terms, not in some pie-in-the-sky piety. Many of them instigated massive social revolutions that they have continued for thousands of years. And they did so not because they avoided the physical, emotional, and mental dimensions of humanness and the ego that is their vehicle, but because they engaged them with a drive and intensity that shook the world to its very foundations. No doubt they were also plugged into the soul, deeper psychic, and spirit, formless self, the ultimate source of their power. But they expressed that power and gave it concrete results precisely because they dramatically engaged their lower dimensions, though through which that power could speak in terms that they could be heard by all. These great movers and shakers were not small egos. They were, in the very best of the term, big egos, precisely because the ego, the functional vehicle of the gross realm, can and does exist alongside the soul, the vehicle of the subtle, and the self, vehicle of the causal. To the extent these great teachers moved the gross realm, they did so with their egos, because the ego is the functional vehicle of that realm. They were not, however, identified merely with their egos. That's a narcissist. They simply found their egos plugged into a radiant cosmic source. The great yogis, saints, and sages accomplished so much precisely because they were not timid little toadies, but great big egos plugged into a dynamic ground and goal of the cosmos itself, plugged into their own higher self, alive to the pure Atma that is one with Brahma. They opened their mouths and the world trembled, fell to its knees, and confronted its radiant God. St. Teresa was a great contemplative, yes, and St. Teresa is the only woman ever to have reformed an entire Catholic monastic tradition. Think about it. Buddha shook India to its foundation. Rumi, Lao Tzu, Plato, these men and women started revolutions in the gross realm that lasted hundreds, sometimes thousands of years, something neither Marx nor Lenin nor Locke nor Jefferson can yet claim. And they did so not because they were dead from the neck down. No, they were monumentally, gloriously, divinely big egos plugged into a deeper psychic, which was plugged straight into God. There is certainly a type of truth to the notion of transcending ego. It doesn't mean destroy the ego, it means plug into something bigger. As Nagarjuna put it, in the relative world, Atma is real. In the absolute, neither Atma nor Anatma is real. Thus, in neither case is Anatta a correct description of reality. The small ego does not evaporate. It remains as the functional center of activity in the conventional realm. As I said, to lose the ego is to become a psychotic, not a sage. Transcending the ego thus actually means to transcend but include the ego in a deeper and higher embrace, first in the soul or deeper psychic, then with the witness or primordial self, then with each previous stage taken up, enfolded, included, and embraced in the radiance of one taste. And that means we do not get rid of the small ego, but rather we inhabit it fully, live it with verve, use it as a necessary vehicle through which higher truths are communicated. Spirit and soul include body, emotions, and mind. They do not erase them. Put bluntly, the ego is not an obstruction to spirit, but a radiant manifestation of spirit. All forms are not other than emptiness, including the form of the ego. It is not necessary to get rid of the ego, but simply to live with it in certain exuberance. When identification spills out of the ego and into the cosmos at large, the ego discovers that the individual Atma is, in fact, all of a piece with Brahma. The big self is indeed no small ego, and thus, to the extent you are stuck in your small ego, a death and transcendence is required. Narcissists are simply people whose egos are not yet big enough to embrace the entire cosmos, and so they try to be central to the cosmos instead. But we do not want our sages to have big egos. We do not even want them to display a manifest dimension at all. Anytime a sage displays humanness in regard to money, food, sex, relationships, we're shocked. Shocked because we are planning to escape life altogether, not live it, and the sage who lives life offends us. We want out, we want to ascend, we want to escape, and the sage who engages life with gusto, lives it to hilt, grabs each wave of life and surfs it to the end. This deeply, profoundly disturbs us, frightens us, because it means that we too might have to engage life with gusto on all levels and not merely escape it into a cloud of luminous ether. We do not want our sages to have bodies, egos, drives, vitality, sex, money, relationships, or life, because those are what habitually torture us and we want out. We do not want to surf the waves of life. We want the waves to go away. We want vaporware spirituality. The integral sage, the non-dual sage, is here to show us otherwise. Known generally as tantric, these sages insist on transcending life by living it. They insist on finding release by engagement, finding nirvana in the midst of samsara, finding total liberation by complete immersion. They enter with awareness the 9 rings of hell, for nowhere else are the 9 heavens found. Nothing is alien to them, for there is nothing that is not one taste. Indeed, the whole point is to be fully at home in the body and its desires, the mind and its ideas, the spirit and its light. To embrace them fully, evenly, simultaneously, since all are equally gestures of the one and only taste. To inhibit lust and watch it play. To enter ideas and follow their brilliance. To be swallowed by spirit and awaken to the glory that time forgot to name. Body and mind and spirit, all contained, equally contained, in the ever-present awareness that grounds the entire display. In the stillness of the night, the goddess whispers. In the brightness of the day, dear God roars. Life pulses, mind imagines, emotions wave, thoughts wander. What are all of these but the endless movements of one taste, forever at play with its own gestures, whispering quietly to all who would listen, is this not you yourself? When the thunder roars, do you hear yourself? When the lightning cracks, do you not see yourself? When clouds floating quietly across the sky, is this not your very own limitless being waving back at you? Ugh, I love that. That brings me so much light. I love it. Okay, so I want to talk about this because there's a little bit of forgiveness work to do here, and a little bit of talking about what self-care really is and the ego really is. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is because I want to display something based on this premise about our parents, about extending further on what he's saying. And these are my own words, not his. This is, you know, keep him separate from mine. I read his words that were exactly his, but using this premise, if you have a parent who is a narcissist, and a lot of people come to my channel and say that they have a parent who's a narcissist, you have two ways of being to survive while you're still under that roof. And if you're really lucky and you have a support system that sees that, like, that's what's going on, which probably isn't likely, but if you're lucky, you might come out of it centered. But for the most part, if you are living in that dynamic, you can oscillate to two sides of a spectrum, which would look like you're either a narcissist to please and survive with that parent, or you're a codependent to please and survive with that parent. So if you have a parent who is emotionally sucking the life force out of you to meet their own emotional gains, you don't get to, at one point, go through the process where I have a 5-year-old daughter and she's just coming out of a phase where, like, life is teaching her not to be narcissistic, but she has to go through, and every functional person has to go through this phase in which they are allowed to be the center of themselves, the center of their universe. And from that phase, and I think a lot of parents want to snap their kids out of it very quickly, and they want to teach them before life gets to teach them, but life will sadly teach them very quickly, normally when they go to school, that they are not the center of the universe. We do not need to force that phase on them by either, like, extending them, by not allowing them to go through it, by protecting them from everything, or by forcing them to face it quickly. If you had a narcissistic parent, it's very likely you were never allowed to go through a narcissistic phase. Okay? And what happens, if you've watched my videos before, if you don't get to go through a phase, you get stuck in it. Okay? And then there's a lot of adult toddlers walking around raising children right now, and that's what I want to talk about, because most of those adult toddlers raising children were also people who, and if you think about it from your parents' perspective, I know in my perspective, my grandfather was, like, classic, like, across the board, no questions asked, hands down, narcissistic personality disorder, very fixed, never changed. That was the reality. My grandmother, very, very codependent. My mother, polarizing to identify with the narcissist as strong, the codependent as weak, still loved her mother but pitied her, saw her father, understood him. And I'm saying this because she herself identified with what she believed would be strong, and what she believed would be strong also for me, which was that she polarized to one side of that spectrum because she herself never got to be the center of her own world, right? So we can't even blame our parents. We can't blame people who are stuck in a phase who they never actually were given the opportunity to healthfully go through that phase, right? Because you have to go through a phase fully to embody the phase fully, to know yourself through that phase, and then from that place you get beyond it. And that's what we have to do with the ego too. Ready? Like, if you're a very diffuse ego and you're, like, borderline schizophrenic, codependent, like, those energies, and I'm not saying, like, diagnostically, because that's a little bit of a different story, but those vibrations that you can understand, if you're that diffuse, right? Or if you're super fixed ego, most of the people that I work with are pretty diffuse ego. They don't know themselves. We can see many things from many angles, which is another thing I hope to get to in a second. So we have to actually formulate our own ego. We have to know our own ego. So I designed a course in which you can basically do this from the inside out, like everything that helped me formulate an ego from that ping-ponging position of, like, oh my God, I can see why this person would think that about me, or I feel all of this shame because this is how I might be seen from that angle, right? Let's look at this. It's this, any codependency or narcissism is a disordered image, right? It's your disorder of your own image, and the image isn't even the point. right? Like that image just is like, oftentimes I work with a lot of people who like, they put money in the way of the thing that they're really after in their career, and they keep looking at the money, and it's like, that's not really what their soul is after, right? They're looking at the wrong aim, and the thing that they keep looking at stands in between them and the thing that they're really after, that's really going to make them feel like they're moving forward and being successful. So we have this idea that we are not supposed to have an ego, and the truth is that we have to actually come to our center inside of ourselves. And it's not pretty, it's disgusting, it's a horrible process to go, oh yes, actually it could be seen that way, and I am that way. Oh, I'm all in here. Oh, I've collected all of my dark parts, all of my repressed parts, all of my own self. So now that I know my ego, my job is far less hard, right? Because I've reached the own edges of it, I know it, I've come through, and I've had to do this in adulthood, right? Like some kids have normal lives, they just get to transcend through all of these things, they don't get stuck, and that's amazing, but like, we're not those kids. So I've had to do this in adulthood, where you have to literally build and go, okay, like I'm putting the pieces together and I can see that they're there, but none of them make sense. And then you have to kind of build your own edges and go, okay, all of the pieces are here and they're clear and they're on the outside and they're my edges. And then you go, okay, I'm all in here. I realize that I'm in here. I'm in the gutter. I'm also in heaven at the same time. Like I'm all in here. All of my parts are here. I could shift the kaleidoscope of myself, but all of that color makes me. And when you get into that place, only then can you actually get beyond that place. So if you are looking for help in kind of going, like, who the hell am I? Like, what does any of this mean? And just untangling those threads, you should check out my course called Soul Centering After Toxic Shame. I would love to have you in there. But for now, what I want to say about self-care in relation to all of this, because somebody said to me the other day that she really appreciates my high regard of self-care. One, I have a lot of people who depend on me, period. I'm a mother of 4, obviously. And I would not be able to do what I do if it wasn't for self-care. I would not be able to care for them optimally, nor myself optimally. But that is not what self-care is about. It's not about scheduling the pedicure so I can get away for a minute, right? Because if I'm trying to get away from what I hate because I'm overwhelmed, that's not self-care. So self-care is the act of actually seeing yourself in your ego, right? All of the self, the whole kaleidoscope of your own parts, and being able to objectively see that and care for it and love it. And I don't mean care for it like take it out and give it. I mean literally care about it. And when you care about yourself, the actions that you're supposed to take of self-care might look different. It's not going to be the pedicure, and it might not even be going for a walk. It might be, hey, have a different thought. Care about that self a little bit differently, because even though I see the shame that is going on right now, ooh, your self-care practice is not to like escape this. It's to go, okay, I see that, and I love you anyway. I see that you're feeling hatred about yourself or hatred about the other, and that's okay, I love you anyway. And then you get to the place where you recognize that when you can get to that place, when you can see every other, kaleidoscope of an ego objectively, it's like, oh, that's just another part of the self, and the other is just a part of myself, and I am just a part of the other self. So when we get to that space, we find it not only easier to hold space for ourselves and care about ourselves, but from that space we can actually care about other people and actually care about the world, because we are accepting. We're not rejecting and going, that's not me, and projecting it out into the world. God, thank God we're not doing that, because it's very frustrating. We're not going, that's not me, and you're this, right? And then when somebody does stab at you with some sort of like energetic dart, you can go, oh, well, I see the dart. And before, when you were hit by it and paralyzed by it, it was a little bit of a different paralyzation, because you were like, oh, this is shame-inducing. This is all me. I'm absorbed by my ego, saying, oh my God, that really hurt. Why are you doing this to me? Instead of going, okay, I see that jab that they just threw at you. I'm going to just pull that right out for you because I care about you. And yeah, that might be they jabbed at a very specific part of your blueprint that is open for a receptor for a reason, and maybe you should look at that as far as like what your ego structure is. Maybe it would be helpful to know why that jab hurt you or was meaningful to you, but God, that jab's not you, and you can easily just pull it right out because you care about the self that was jabbed. Just because somebody else doesn't care about you doesn't mean that you shouldn't, right? Like, I grew up definitely being like, nobody cares about me, so I'm not worth caring about. I shouldn't care about me either, and having needs was a bad thing. And again, this is where the forgiveness work comes in, is like, if I had a parent who never also got to be the center of her own universe, she's in a old woman's body trying to still get that need met of being the center of the universe, and the only way that she knows how to do that is a maladaptive way of doing it, right? So I have to have compassion for the part of me that is also her in that way, and that was willing to transcend beyond that. And I also have to have compassion for the part of her that is not necessarily interested in transcending beyond that, because she doesn't trust herself to get big enough, right, to like really know herself. That's true self-care, is like knowing your own ego, is like standing in a mature ego and going, okay, I know you. And that's also the only place you can change the ego from, or any energetic pattern, is from looking at it, seeing exactly what it is, accepting exactly what it is. That's the foundation, right? Like, we are not trying to kick out our egos from under us and walk around from our knees up. That's not what we're doing. The ego is a foundation of the flesh. And when we're in it, we have to have this currency too that is moving upward, not just downward. And a lot of my demographic, we're always like up in spirit, very sick all the time. We're not like in our flesh and in our bodies. So I think that the way that it was really easy, the easiest for me to have a mature ego was through very guttural exercises and asking myself really hard questions, and embodying the physical body that I used to think was disgusting and hateful and a prison, and really just getting into the whole human experience. So check out my course if this moves you, but also definitely if you're considering self-care, ask yourself, is this because I'm actually caring for myself, or because I'm trying to fix myself, because I'm telling myself that actually I'm not good enough, so I need to go get the massage or the mani-pedi? Or is it that I genuinely, like, the care that I have for the kaleidoscope that is myself, that is my body, that is my spirit, that is all of that, is this the action? Because self-care should not be an action nearly as much as it is an active verb, right? So self-care is not a stopping point and a starting point. It is an active verb. So when you care about yourself, that whatever that activity is that wants to move through you, if you care about yourself, you will allow that activity to move through you. It's not going to be like, oh, I have to go get a mani-pedi because I just really feel like getting away from my kids right now, right? Like, that's not what it is. So ask yourself, is this me trying to fix me? Or is this me actually caring about me, despite that, like, I feel like shit and I don't love me, or like that, you know, is this actually me going, hey, I see you in there, and I see that, like, you're having the human experience and the human condition, and I want to just, like, send you some love because I see what's going on for you. Self-care is really caring about that self, okay? It's really actually caring about yourself, because you're an essential self, and I know that we are made to believe that, like, we are a void piece of shit, like, absolute nihilistic, meaningless, pointless piece of shit, but you in there, you that are in there, you that are in here, hi, right? We're in there. Hi, we're in here. You're an essential part of the whole sonship. So yourself is important, and you can care for it, and you might think that's selfish, but to not care for it, like I would say a million times over, is slapping God right in the face, right? To say, you should be different, I wish I was made different than this, and I don't like you for being this way, and I don't like this role of being this person's child, or this person's, like, scapegoat. Like, no, this is the kingdom assignment, and I care about the self that has come through to fulfill the assignment. That's self-care. And then actively giving from that place that which it needs. So this isn't about taking our egos out of it. It's about keeping our egos, getting bigger than our egos, as Ken Wilber would say, but I would just say keeping our egos in check, in that we can actually use it as a foundation. It's like our soil that, like, holds our roots in, so our spirit can be like, what's up? I'm here, right? Like, if you're in the flesh, you're gonna have an ego. So maybe it's the inversion aspect. It's not like trying to get rid of the ego, it's trying to get into the ego to know the ego, and only then can you transcend it. So be soft in our projections toward the people in our lives who they themselves were not able, when they were young enough to go through a narcissistic phase, that they needed to go through that phase to move forward. They were not gifted that experience in life, and they have not found a way to give that to themselves or find it in the world thus far, so they're still stuck in that pattern. Okay? If you have a narcissistic parent that never got to be through that, they're a narcissist because they never got to be the center of the universe when they were supposed to be. Okay? So maybe we can be gentle on them and ourselves through that. Bye, guys.